some specific techniques and things, happy to ask me if I could just make this whole workshop really just a big, kind of one of those late night ads for the George Foreman grill or something. Just kind of pump the DVD the whole time, so that's sort of what I'm trying to do here. And but I do it is pretty cool. You can check it out. There's some clips online and stuff. But I talk about some specific techniques for the guitar, like that kind of cross over with rock music, like string bending and palm muting and tremolo picking, moving up and down the neck quickly, working on your right hand speed, things like that. And so I can't cover like a huge amount of it, but I thought maybe I would just sort of take a vote and see, what sounds like the most interesting thing. Do you guys want to talk about like I said, it's like string bending, like palm muting, kind of like chunky stuff, or like double stops, getting around on the neck more, like using the whole fingerboard, or like right hand technique, playing faster, like what else? Somebody start shouting out. What sounds like fun? Right hand. It's all about the right hand.
Getting around the neck.
I'm not taking. I'm getting around the neck. Okay. All right. I'm not taking the bacon.
Chicken bacon.
Bacon. Yeah. I was at a Great Mandomania one year when we were. Everybody starts asking about the technique and stuff, and Joe Craven just said, it's all in the right hand. It really is. And as simple as that sounds, it's really true. Like everything from your groove to your attack to your dynamics to the clarity that you play with, or not playing cleanly, which is definitely a choice at times. You don't want everything to sound clear and precise. It all is coming from the right hand. The short but honest answer to how you play faster and cleaner is, what everybody tells you. You slow down, you practice with a metronome, and you do it over and over again. And in some ways, it's kind of like when, there are all these fad diets and things, and you eat this and not that, and try this and all this, and ultimately, the doctors always say, eat well and exercise, right? And it's kind of the same way with the right hand technique, where you just have to practice slowly. And it is something that I think that everybody, from the absolute beginner to the touring professional, has to deal with, is telling themselves to slow down and practice carefully, because it's really easy to just let a tune that you're working on kind of get out of hand, to where you're just like, you're not just, when you really can't play at all. I mean, when you're doing this, you don't know what you're doing, but there's a very fine line between, going and playing it like this, which is the way that you hear a lot of people practice. And you say, like, what are you doing? And they say, I'm practicing. And that is not the way to practice. So, like, absolutely, and as simple as that seems, like, that's how you get to play as fast as you hope in your wildest dreams you'll be able to play in 10 years, is by practicing everything and making it sound like music. So, if the fastest that you can play Whiskey Before Breakfast is like this. Now, if you can do that and get every note right and make every note have a good tone and be in time, I promise you, if you do that every day for a year, you'll be able to play it twice as fast next year. And I know that sounds like an exaggerated claim, but it's really not, because there's not a lot of difference between doing that and going. The difference is that, of course, it's faster, but the technique is the same. And the problem that most people have when they try to speed up is that if you start sloppy, it just gets a little bit sloppier every time you ratchet the click up, to where by the time you're playing at the speed you want to play, it's like, it's just a mess. So that's really unfortunately the short and long answer at the same time. But there are some tricks that I think can help with this, other than just really listening to what they're doing, which is always the most important thing about practice. I mean, I would say this about anything, whether it's chord progressions, or whether it's rhythm, or whether it's playing like lead stuff or runs. All of these things, the most important thing when you practice is to listen to what you're doing. Which is why I tell people, like, the absolute worst way to practice is, well, sorry, don't worry about it. Let's know if it's for us. The worst way to practice is when you're watching TV. And I think that's because when you watch TV, you think to yourself, well, I'm getting muscle memory down while I'm practicing, and I can also like watch the ball game or whatever I'm doing. And it kind of is a good way to get muscle memory down, but unless you're playing the song perfectly while you're watching the ball game, and the odds are kind of low on that, what you're doing is you're drilling in negative muscle memory, and then you turn off the ball game and you realize, well, I was making some mistakes and I didn't even notice because it was like full count and the bases are loaded and stuff, So listen to what you're doing. So if you're going to play, Bill Cheatham, don't worry about playing it fast. Don't worry about about playing it at any particular tempo. Make it sound like Bill Cheatham. Make it sound great at whatever tempo you can do, and then take it from there. So, again. And I got some of that idea from that first Tone Poems album that Dave Brisman and Tony Bryson, two of my enormous heroes, did, where most of the songs on that album are not really that hard. And there's some of the most beautiful things you've ever heard. And if you're a pretty advanced guitar player, you sit down with that album and you go, oh, I can learn all this stuff. I can learn that song in an hour. I can figure this out in 10 minutes. And yet, it never sounds as good as it does when those guys play. And the reason is because they mean every note of what they're doing. But getting back to the quick right hand thing, one thing that you can do that will help is to practice tremolo picking with your right hand. Because once you start really trying to play fast, at some point your right hand technique has to go from that really, really kind of choppy. Now there's a limit to how fast you can do that. I mean, I can kind of go, and it's painful, but if I want to play really fast, I have to be able to smooth it out too. And the way to do that is by having your right hand stop making individual motions as much and start to make a really smooth kind of fluttering motion, which is exactly like what you do on the mandolin when you play a tremolo. And there's no reason you can't do tremolo on the guitar. I love to do that, so that kind of stuff. And the way to do that is practice it with one note. It's a lot easier with one string than it is with two when you're first starting on it. And just take an open string, and you'll start out and you'll do it like this. And it'll be really hard to get it even, but just practice to make it count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And get to where you can do that really evenly and do it with the metronome and kind of speed it up. And the key is, tremolo is almost never just as fast as you can do it. It's almost always in time, believe it or not. And even when you hear Bill Monroe or Sam Bush or somebody who's just extraordinary at the instrument do a tremolo, it's in time. So they're doing like a group of 4 or 6 or 8 or even sometimes 12 within each beat. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4. It might be 1, 2, or that's 8 times between each top of my foot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 1, 2, like that. And if you practice like that, that will really cross over into anything that you play, because you're getting used to moving your right hand in a smooth motion. And what you'll find is that as you start to play faster and faster, the most important thing is keeping everything smooth and loose. The worst thing that happens to you when you're trying to play fast is you get tight. And tension tends to start in the backs of your hands, and then it sort of builds up your forearms, and then before you know it, your biceps and your shoulders are tight, and you just can't play well like that. Once you're stiff, you can't make these smooth, fluid motions that you need to play the instrument. So I shake my arms out, I'll touch my toes and stretch before. To me, it's much more important for me to bend over and touch my toes before I get on stage than it is for me to rip on scales or something, because it's all about having your body be relaxed and ready to go. And that's much more than just a musical thing. But that's kind of the right hand, because you can extend that tremolo picking to doing like a little scale exercise. So if I'm going, and ideally, and then go back to playing the tremolo and sort of check, because what you want is you would like that smooth motion that you've got on the one note to keep going, regardless of what your left hand is doing or what string you're playing on. And that's hard, because once your brain starts getting divided and starts thinking about where your fingers are going, and of course, where everybody looks when they're playing the guitar, myself included most of the time, is you stare at your left hand and you start thinking about where your fingers are going, and you completely neglect the right hand. So I like to do things where I go back and forth between playing actual music and then just playing something that's mindlessly easy, so that I can focus on keeping my right hand playing well. So maybe you're just going, and I do this for a second, and I look at my right hand, because I don't have to look at my left hand, because this is really easy. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 on my left hand, and then my right hand, I make sure that I like the way my hand looks. And what I want is not a lot of extra motion, not a lot of excessive sloppiness. But more importantly than that, I don't really care about sloppiness as much as I care about it being smooth. And so as long as I like the way my right hand is going, then I'll try to play a scale or a song or anything but keep going back to your right hand and make sure that what it's doing is smooth and kind of under control. And one of the easiest ways to practice and completely change the way you're playing a song is force yourself not to look at your left hand at all. You know, play Soldier's Joy like this. You can hear like I'm screwing it up because I'm thinking about what does this look like, and it's kind of funny when you try to look at your feet. You know, or look at your pick, whatever. There's an old joke about a horse and a centipede, and the horse is watching the centipede and says, you know, how do you coordinate all of those 100 feet and get them all in order? Because I have trouble just like running with 4 legs. And the centipede goes, oh, it's really easy. And he falls over. There you go. So it's a good exercise to look at your right hand, because when you first do it, it'll freak you out. You'll think it'll make it easier to play, but it actually will make it harder. What you want to do is not be thinking about what your right hand is doing, but just be, you're just looking for smoothness. You're not trying to think about, is it going a little too far, or should I consider more? Am I in the plane of the string? Like, it's not intellectual like that. It's just that I want a smooth, repetitive motion that is under control, where I can play dynamically you know, kind of know what my pick is going to do. Should we play another song?
Yeah.
All right. it really is harder playing slow than it is fast. It makes your heart, like between every beat, you hear like 3 heartbeats in there. Right? About the guitar. This is one of the older Santa Cruz guitars that you'll see. It's a 1990. It was a 1990. It's a 1990 model OM, and it looks a little bit different from the OMs that the Santa Cruz Guitar Company makes now. They put the logo up on the headstock now, and they bind the headstock, and all the little cosmetics are different. But it's basically the same guitar as a brand new OM. It's just a garden variety Alaska spruce and Indian rosewood, and 1 3/4 nut. And I've got 13 to 56 gauge strings on it, and I'm using a 1.4 millimeter pick, and my birthday is June 14th. So. The only thing that's ever gone wrong with this guitar is they had a bad run of tuners, and I just swapped those out last year, and these are doing great. But the thing's been refretted. The top's been crazed from carrying it around on airplanes and stuff. The humidity changes and stuff like that. But this guitar has just held up wonderfully well. I even dropped it once, which completely devastated me. Like right before I was about to go on stage, I dropped the guitar onto concrete from about 4 feet. The reason is because I was messing around with my strap. I didn't have it on the way, and then it's okay to have your guitar strap a little bit funky as long as you're holding and playing your guitar. But then someone goes, "Oh, hey, James," and you start talking to him, and the next thing you know, so my guitar fell like this, and it landed right here, and it bounced up, and I managed to grab it like a pressure. No, I'm not that coordinated, but I got lucky. It bounced once, and I caught it by the neck. And I played the show, and the guitar was fine, and I didn't realize until that night in the hotel that the top had separated from the side for like about 3 inches. You could stick a piece of paper all the way across there. But no, they put some glue in there, and it's fine. So it needs to. I mean, if I really cared about how it looked because of all the road wear and stuff, I'd have some places on it refinished. But I don't know why. It sounds good, and don't mess with it. So that's the Santa Cruz. Questions?
What album tomorrow?
I was wondering, I was like, there are an awful lot of people here for a guitar workshop. Yeah. What I can tell you is that we had a rehearsal last night. If you were camped out really near the Walker Center, you might know what the album is. Sarah Dugas was sounding awesome. We've got some guests that we're really excited about, and you're just going to have to come.
Talk about string bending.
Talk about string bending. String bending is, I'm almost going to say no to that. Like I will talk about string bending, but I'm being completely serious here. String bending it's physically difficult. It is, no matter who you are or what you are playing, you are on the verge of injuring yourself. When you've been string, you think I'm kidding? There's a wonderful interview this guy did with Stevie Ray Vaughan. And the year was probably about 1985. It was right when Stevie was really kind of hitting and becoming an international sensation. And he was really known for having a very physical technique. He used heavy strings and really beat on the instrument. And this guy was interviewing him after the show. And Stevie went up there, put on an amazing rip-roaring 2-hour show, goes off the stage, and the first thing that his road manager does is hands him a towel, and he wraps up his left hand in a towel because all of his fingers are bleeding, like blood coming out from underneath the nails on his left hand. And he sits there for a while with his hand wrapped up in the towel doing this interview. And the interviewer was just really impressed by this. And then finally Stevie takes the towel off, and his fingertips are just blistered. And the guy says, do you mind if I ask you, what are you going to do? Because you got a show tomorrow night. And Stevie says, well, I don't normally show people this, but, and he takes off his shirt, and he gets out a tube of super glue, and he dips super glue onto each of his fingertips and sticks it onto his shoulder, and holds his hand there for 5 minutes and rips skin off his shoulder to put pads in the front. You don't think I'm making this up? So all you who think that you're badasses out there, think again. Because it's you gotta suffer for your art, I'm telling you. Yeah, it is. So the moral of the story is that string bending is hard. And if you believe it, there are times when Stevie Ray Vaughan used heavier strings on his electric guitar than I use on my acoustic guitar, and these are medium gauge strings. So, but yeah, playing acoustic guitar, which means, when you've got an electric guitar with 9s on it and you got it set up real well, string bending is almost a piece of cake. But then the guys who really are showing off with nines on the electric guitar are trying to bend up like a fifth and stuff. So then it becomes hard again. But on the acoustic guitar, a whole step bend, with 12 or 13 gauge strings is pretty tough. And the first thing that I would advise is you have to think about where the string is going. And this seems like a really obvious thing, but it took me like 10 years of playing before I ever really thought about this, so I'll save you guys some time. When you bend the string up, the other strings have to move out of the way. I mean, I know that sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but the question is, where do they go? And the answer is that there are kind of three places they can go. They can either go over the top of your finger, they can go underneath your finger, or they can go right along the edge of your finger. And unless if you're a blues player, sometimes it's okay to let the string go under your finger and you get that effect where you're trying to bend one note and it turns into like three because you're mashing down a bunch of strings and you get that kind of like soulful bluesy sound. But most of the time you don't want that to happen. On the other hand, if you let the strings go over your finger, they'll slide, and talk about bleeding like Stevie, they'll go over the front of your finger and either get caught under your nail or around your cuticle, and they'll cut you and it'll hurt. So, and not to mention that you'll completely blow the bend, which is much more important than the blood anyway. And so, to bend effectively, what you've got to do is you have to bend in such a way that all the strings that are getting out of the way as you bend it up are getting pushed along slightly above the string that you're bending without going under your nail or without going under your finger. And that's a matter of angle. And I can't really tell you how to do that as much. It's something that you kind of have to figure out yourself. But think of that as being the goal, that if you dig too deeply down into the strings, the string will go up over the top of your fingers. And if you push too much horizontally across the plane of the fingerboard, it'll go under, and you'll get that effect where you're trying to bend, and instead of it sounding like, it sounds like, where the string gets caught underneath. And what you want to do is get that happy medium where, now right now as I'm bending that, this second string is muted, and the reason is because it's mashed up against the side of my finger. It's not on my nail, and it's not underneath where the string is. And that's the key. And some of that comes down to setup. I find that for playing really fast stuff, especially hammer-ons and pull-offs, the lower you can get the action in your guitar, the better. But the lower you put the action in your guitar, the harder it is to bend strings. And I'm amazed at some guys who can do it. Like there are electric guitar players, like Joe Satriani in particular, has his guitar set up like the strings are just almost touching the frets. And yet somehow he magically is able to get all these. I can't play his guitar. It's just everything that I've been able to sound like that bluesy thing where all the strings get caught under, because I can't get under the string enough to bend it up and push the next string out of the way. He's got a technique where it works. So it's an individual thing. But for me, the key is having your action like low, but on the sort of medium low side, and that lets me bend better. So I actually, when I'm setting up a guitar, I think more about string bending than I do anything else. More than I think about buzzing, more than I think about like how hard am I going to play, how loud am I going to play, or how easy pull-offs are and things like that. It's all about getting it so that the string bending is comfortable, because I like to bend strings a lot. But the reason that I almost said I wouldn't talk about this, and now I only talked for 10 minutes about it, is because you have to be strategic about the amount that you bend. So, quite frankly, I have a set at 1 o'clock over on the Hillside stage, and I'm planning on rocking and bending some strings, and if I do a bunch of string bending right now, I will be in physical pain and would have trouble bending strings in like 45 minutes. But there are tricks, and the trick is don't bend as far. So the half-step bend is your friend. Like whenever you want the sound of a string bend, but you're not willing to do the rip it off your shoulder technique, you fake people. Instead of bending a whole step, meaning 2 frets, like if I'm on this note and I want to bend up to this note, instead of hurting myself and going like that, see, it hurt, ow. I'll do this. And it almost sounds the same, but it's a half step. I'm playing the C here, and then I'm fretting a C sharp and bending that up to a D. Just a half step bend. And it's much easier to play. So unless I really am desperately trying to get that like Jimmy Page thing out of the guitar, I will hedge and do a half fret bend, because it just, it saves you, so you've got a little something to do in the next song. So half step bends are your friend. I talk about them a lot in the video. How much time do I have? What time is it, you guys?
All right. You've got hours.
I've got hours. Well, no, I don't like. I would love to hang out after the show and talk more about this stuff. I am running over, so I am going to be running over to the Hillside. I'm doing a set that I'm really excited about with Jens Kruger and Kim Warner. These guys are like, amazing. I'm going to go over there and try to keep up with them at a set. And so if you want to see kind of the acoustic guitar rock thing, in the way that we're actually going to do it, which is very little rehearsal and hanging on for dear life, that's making the acoustic guitar rock. And we'll be doing that over at the Hillside at 1. So I will unfortunately have to jump in a golf cart and go over there. But I'll be hanging around after that show. So if you've got any guitar questions, if you want to talk to me about, I don't know, capos and picks and whatever, we can wrap after that. But 11 minutes. All right.
How do you work your way around the neck with the left hand?
Okay. Yeah. The key is ultimately you want to get to the point in the neck where you don't have to think about where you are.